Ready to soundtrack your summer? With Red Bull Summer All Day Play, you choose a playlist that fits your summer vibe the best. Are you a festival fanatic, a deep end DJ, a road dog, or a trail mixer? Just add a song to your chosen playlist and put your summer on track. Red Bull Summer All Day Play. Red Bull gives you wings. Visit redbull.com/brightsummer ahead to learn more. See you this summer.
For the News and Observer, I'm Dawn Vaughn, Capitol Bureau Chief and host of Under the Dome. Today, I'm joined by House member Erin Paré. Representative Paré is a Republican from Wake County and Holly Springs. She's been in office since January 2021. She's an appropriations chair and budget writer, chair of the House Property Tax Reform Committee. As I'm sure listeners are aware, property tax is probably one of the top few issues this legislative session so far. Representative Paré grew up in Herndon, Virginia, graduated with an MA in International Commerce and Policy and a BA in Government International Politics from George Mason University. She and her husband, Wayne, have lived in a variety of places. He is a 24-year Army veteran, about that, and settled into Holly Springs several years now. So before we get into the legislative session, since this is your first time being on, why did you want to get into politics in the first place?
Yeah, so thanks for having me on. I listen to this all the time when
Great.
I'm taking my walk, so I was really happy to be asked to be on with you today. So politics for me, I guess I started getting interested in that at the ending of high school. And, George Mason University is right outside of Washington, D.C., so I decided to go there for my BA in international politics. And there's lots of opportunities for internships. And when I was in college, I actually interned for the White House press office. And back then, since I'm so old, we didn't really have the internet as we know it now. So we had to show up at about 3:30 in the morning and compile the hot topics of the day, of the news day, into stapled packets and then deliver those throughout the West Wing. That was my job. And so it was that was Bill Clinton was president then. And of course, I'm a Republican. So it was very interesting to see the inside of how the White House worked. So those type of opportunities were available going to George Mason, since you're right there. So that was a really cool experience. But after I graduated and got my master's degree in international commerce and policy, which is sort of an international business and economics degree, I became a junior lobbyist. And so I worked on Capitol Hill, and we had an office downtown, actually right across the street from the White House. And so I was up talking to members of Congress and their staff every day about issues. And, I think now about my job, and I was sort of on the other side as the lobbyist, and not knowing back then that I would be in an elected position here to deal with lobbyists all the time. That was a great experience to prepare me for this. So it was just, you got to understand how things happen on the federal level, like with regulatory reform, and how that can trickle down to local governments. And so it was great experience. It prepared me for what I'm doing today.
What do you think of? I don't know if anyone there. You always hear about former lawmakers becoming lobbyists, not the other way around. Do you listen differently when you talk to them, or like kind of knowing where, like that they're coming from a different side as far as when they're making a pitch to you? Yeah,
I think so. It's obviously a different role when you're trying to get in to see certain people and have them sign on to a certain bill, and the pressure's on you to make your case, but also be a resource to the member of Congress or the legislature at which one we're talking about. But so I can kind of see where they're coming from on certain things, and sitting back and kind of remembering what it was like to sit in these chairs. We're in my office right now. I think probably I can understand this environment a little bit more coming into this position than just the average person who gets elected in their local districts and coming up here. It's sort of that background was helpful.
You mentioned the West Wing. The West Wing, the TV show, was on at that same time, I would think, right? Or about then. Did you watch the West Wing?
I know about the West Wing.
Yeah.
I don't know if it was on that long ago. I feel like it was a long time ago that I was doing that. But yeah.
We're in the same age range, so I feel like that. I feel like I've watched it and it was a while ago, but I don't remember exactly.
Sometime in the last 30 years or whatever, 20 years.
Do you think, I guess, like other perspective and with having that background and being an Army family for a long time, does that kind of make you think differently about different bills that come up? Of course, North Carolina is, a huge military state.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. We have that perspective too. My husband is the military member. And so, I met him when I was in my 20s actually doing this job. Maybe I can tell you how we met. I don't know if I know,
No, how did you?
Well, this is already out there, but so when I was in graduate school, I was a Redskins cheerleader for 3 seasons. And we actually, at the beginning of the war, took a trip to visit the troops who were stationed overseas in Iraq, and he was stationed there. And so that's how I met him in Baghdad.
Wow.
Yeah. I'm loving Baghdad.
Story.
So we got to know each other and exchanged phone numbers, and then a few years later we got married.
Wow.
So, yeah. But anyway, so then I became in a military family, active duty military family, and we moved many times, 5 times all around the country, and ended up at his last duty station was JSOC down at Fort Bragg, and he had to live within an hour of Fort Bragg. So eventually, kind of the idea was I would get back into doing public policy like I did before. So we kind of wanted to live somewhere closer to Raleigh, but within an hour to Fort Bragg. And so we picked Holly Springs as our forever home. The kids, when they move so much, they don't really have when they're asked, where are you from? They don't know what to say. But when you finally settle down and retire, then that's their forever home. So our forever home was Holly Springs.
Or the longest years you live anywhere. Because I'm the same thing. Growing up in Army bred, I'm like, well, multiple places, but I was in Northern Virginia for the longest. That's sort of thing, I lived at Fort Bragg as a kid. It was really fun as a kid anyway. Maybe not as much for the adults working there. Maybe it is. I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about. I mentioned property tax at the beginning. So where things stand now for listeners, the House has had for months now this property tax reform committee where it's been a lot of discussions. A lot of feedback from local governments and other people, and of course the members of the committee. And then you all had your final report out, which included getting rid of this Blue Ridge tax exemption loophole, which seems to have pretty widespread support, and then putting a constitutional amendment on ballots to allow the legislature to set basically a cap, but not a specific amount yet. Is that the best way to kind of describe that, what the amendment would do?
That's right. So that the one bill with regards to a constitutional amendment that would allow the legislature to put limitations on property tax increases. So that bill just basically asks the public, do you give the General Assembly the authority to do this, put those limitations on property tax increases? It doesn't define what that limitation is. So it's just, is there a mandate from the public for the General Assembly to do that is the question that this constitutional amendment poses to the voter and would be on the November ballot.
Was there any discussion on what, it seems like a lot of maybe the local governments that are worried about this want to know, like, well, what is the amount? And there's no answer yet. It's just the question, putting it to the voters, do you want there to be an amount?
That's exactly right. Yeah. So we have received some feedback from local governments and associations that represent local governments that have concern over what that limitation could look like. And that's understandable. But I think that, without a defined limit, it could be a lot of things that the legislature comes up with. But this bill only deals with the question to the voters. If it passes, which I think it probably will, then it would be the next long session when the legislature comes back that they would have to do the work via this committee to determine what that definition of a limitation could look like.
What would you like it to look like?
Yeah, so I think For me, I think that there are a lot of local governments, municipalities, and counties that are doing it right. The word or the phrase or the term revenue neutral is not something we just came up with. That's already in statute. So statute says local governments have to publish the revenue neutral rate, meaning if your house's assessment goes up, local governments should lower the tax rate in order for there to be about the same amount of revenue coming into the local government so local tax bills don't skyrocket. So a lot of local governments are already doing that. Some local governments are not cutting the tax rate, or they're not cutting the tax rate enough for there to be about the same amount of revenue coming in, which has created the problem of some skyrocketing tax bills. So for me, I think that there should be a reasonable limit, which could look like revenue neutral plus inflation plus population growth, and then some exceptions for bonds or emergencies or things like that, I think is pretty reasonable, and what a lot of local governments are already doing.
So we're recording this in your office at the Legislative Office Building on Thursday afternoon, April 30th. So if people are listening to this next week or this week as you're listening, the Senate is going to vote on a bill being run by Senate Leader Phil Berger, who wants to pass separately a moratorium for a year pause on the revaluations. And I asked him just today, on Thursday, well, the House, talking to Speaker Hall the other day saying, well, Berger wants to run this separately and then also, is interested in the amendment and the things that you want to do. Is this a little bit of House versus Senate that we've seen a lot recently, particular with the budget, as far as whose priority, would pass both chambers first?
Right. So I've heard about this bill that Senator Berger is going to file, and I actually listened to the discussion about it this morning in the Senate Rules Committee just to learn more about it. I mean, my question when I first heard about it was, what does it actually accomplish? And but I think that might be more narrowly tailored to certain counties, perhaps. I know for Wake County is what I represent, Southern Wake County. They've already invested a lot of money into their next revaluation. And so my question would be, if this does pass, is there some investment there that counties have already made in their reval that is lost? And so I think that might be a concern, but I think there is a general feeling among the House and the Senate that you can probably see with these two bills to just kind of hit the brakes a little bit on what we're seeing with property tax bills going up and revals happening. And I think there's just a feeling that we need to step back and figure this out because it seems a little out of control, and that's probably where that bill is coming from.
So, no laws yet, but maybe something this session.
Right.
We need to take a quick break. When we come back, we're going to talk more with Representative Paré about this House legislative session, including the numbers of Republicans versus Democrats and now unaffiliated in the room. You're listening to Under the Dome. I'm Capitol Bureau Chief Dawn Vaughn here with Representative Erin Paré, a Wake County Republican. We talked about property tax reform before the break. And let's talk a little bit more about money and the state budget, which really we were only about 2 weeks into the legislative short session. House Speaker Dustin Hall, Senate Leader Phil Berger have had some movement from what I've described as the trench warfare of their budget stalemate that's lasted almost a year. So where are you at this moment as far as your optimism? I suppose it's still early in session when everyone is more optimistic, but on things especially like the teacher raises.
Yeah. Well, I'm optimistic and very hopeful that we will be able to come to an agreement because for the House and for the Speaker and for myself, teacher raises and state employee raises are very important. We feel like there needs to be a correction made with teacher raises in particular because we're so far behind our neighboring states and competition for talent is regional. And so it makes market sense to be competitive with our neighboring states when it comes to teacher raises and for recruitment and retention. I mean, and that's just been well documented in study after study that, we are actually doing pretty well with education outcomes and proficiency from a national standpoint. Where other neighboring states can come up behind us is to recruit away the number one factor in school, measurement for how students are doing, and that's teachers. So we need to be more competitive. And I think I would like to say everybody in this building would agree with that. It's just getting down to the details of what that actually looks like and getting it done.
And then I think, any sort of timeline that people think, like it's, again, at the beginning of session, maybe in the coming weeks, Speaker Hall said, I asked him, I'm like, are you optimistic in days, in weeks, or, months, which is less optimistic? He said weeks. Do you still have that at this point, or?
Yeah, weeks is probably a reasonable estimation of when this could get wrapped up. I can say that all throughout the interim, from the end of the year through today, there has been a lot of work being done behind the scenes, lots of conversation, even with just I can speak for the House, our chamber and our budget team. We've been working hard to get this done prior to session beginning. So I think there is a real willingness and a desire on everybody's part to get a budget complete. I mean, a lot of the budget's already law. When we say we don't have a budget, we have a lot of the budget done already, but those big pieces are still out there, tax policy and salaries. And a lot of work's being done to come to an agreement on that. So I am optimistic. I'm very hopeful. And I think it's just good for the people of North Carolina that we come to an agreement and a reasonable conclusion on those two pieces.
I think everybody's been waiting a long, long time now.
Yes, I agree. Yeah, I agree with that.
Other big things that have started the session have been, 3 House Democrats who are basically swing voters. They voted with Republican. A lot of bills pass with bipartisan support. Probably most bills pass with bipartisan support. Controversial bills don't usually. And when they do, sometimes House members or Senate members get primaried which is when your own party runs another candidate against you. It supports them with endorsements or money or other things. And that's what happened for 3 swing House Democrats who lost. Shelley Willingham, who's still a Democrat, has no interest in switching parties. However, former Democrat now, Carla Cunningham, former Democrat now, Nassif Majid, both switched parties in the past week to unaffiliated. So a lot of the questions that are out there that myself, other reporters have asked is are they going to, who do they want to caucus with? Do they still want to caucus with Democrats? Do they want to caucus with Republicans? They want to caucus, I guess, with each other, the 2 caucus of, unaffiliated House members, and then it'll be a surprise on the floor how they vote, right? Because the caucus meetings, especially when it's right before session, it's when everybody talks about what are we going to do when we get to the floor, and some, I'm sure, mundane things like who's going to talk or not, but also how all the votes are. So how do those dynamics on the other side of the room play into you? I know you don't want to talk about what everybody says in caucus, but I'm sure everybody's still talking about it. Like, what does this really mean for the House this session and for House Republicans?
Yeah. Well, I haven't thought about that third option about them caucusing together. That's an interesting thought. But I think the feeling among my colleagues and I on the House side is it's kind of a sad thing that happened there. I mean, Shelley and, Carla and, Representative Majid, who they're all great people. And I think that it's a sad day when we can't have members be able to vote their conscience and according to their constituency. I know for me, there's things that I disagree with my own caucus sometimes. And, I want to be able to vote according to what I think my people sent me to Raleigh to do. So I think it's kind of a sad thing that we saw with that, with Carla and Shelley. But, I don't know how they're going to move forward, but as far as the caucusing goes, but I know that we just appreciate their independent thinking and their willingness to vote their conscience. And it's too bad because I think that the General Assembly, generally speaking, is losing some really smart people, principled people, and because of all this.
Do you want to say what you disagree with your party on? Or is that something that you guys only say amongst yourselves?
Yeah, I think it depends on the issue and the bill. I mean, as you know, some bills have things in them that I think maybe run counter to what my constituents think is appropriate for us to be doing. I would maybe just throw out, generally speaking, some cultural issues that I think may not be something I want to vote one way or another on, depending on what it is. So there are some things that are important to members, and there's things that, that might be important to them, but it's not really something that I think that my constituents in Southern Wake County would want me to be voting on, or voting yes on, or voting no on. So, I think it's different for everyone, but that's why we were elected by our 90,000 people in our corner of North Carolina, is we can go up there and feel good about representing them in a way that we feel like they deserve.
Do you break with the vote, or is there something that happens if there's something a Republican disagrees with, or is there something that happens behind the scenes where the bill just doesn't come to the floor because the votes aren't there?
That's true. There are some members that feel strongly about bringing a certain bill to the floor, and there's conversations that happen behind the scenes within each caucus, both Republican and Democrat. I'm sure with the Democrats, just like it is with the Republicans, where we say is who's in favor of this bill. If you're going to vote for this bill, tell us, and if there's not enough votes for it, then most likely will not come to the floor.
It will be sent back to rules to
die.
Exactly. All right. Before we get to our picks for Headliner of the Week, anything else this session that we should talk about, or things that you're working on? Any other legislation, or is the budget pretty much the big focus?
Budget's big, property tax is big, but I do have something that I think will be interesting for people. It's actually happening this week, and my colleague Mike Sheetseld and I are going to be filing a bill that reallocates how the meals tax is being done in Wake County. So right now you pay, when you go out to dinner and drink, you pay 1%. Prepared food and beverage tax on everything you buy. All of that goes to Wake County, and the municipalities who are generating it don't get any of it back unless they compete for a small grant, which you either get or you don't get. But this would match Mecklenburg and Wake County and would return 50% of what they generate back to the municipality to be invested there and not just in the communities of downtown Raleigh, which I think is pretty fair.
And have you filed this bill yet? Or
I think it's going to hit the dashboard today.
Okay.
And so that's going to be pretty interesting to see how that happens.
How quickly will it move, do you think?
I think there's a lot of support for it. I think the municipalities are going to be happy about this, where they get to have a return on what their communities are generating for investment back in their municipalities. And I think I have some support among members in the House that work in finance. And so I'm looking forward to talking more about that.
Okay. All right. We've got some news broken on the podcast. All right. Well, let's get to, right before Headliner, I always ask if there's a lawmaker. Your office is here in the LOB. There's a snack bar downstairs, and in the legislative building, there's the cafeteria and the snack bar. One, do you ever eat there? And two, what do you order when you do?
So I do go to the cafeteria sometimes, but not very often. But when I do, I get this salad. I don't know if this sounds appetizing to anybody, but I just love it. It's like romaine, cheddar, mushrooms, peas, broccoli, and Thousand Island dressing. I don't know what it is. I get it. It's wonderful every time I eat it. It just hits a spot. And a Diet Coke.
Okay.
So, yeah. But I usually just take it to go, and, yeah, it gets me through the day.
I have noticed in, bipartisan fashion, you can get both Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi in the legislative cafeteria. Okay. It's on either sides of the fountain drinks, or actually in the coolers too. So I drink a lot of Diet Coke, so I'll drink Diet Pepsi when I'm here, I guess, to switch it up. So, all right, well, let's move on to our picks for Headliner of the Week. What's your pick for Headliner of the Week?
Yeah, so my pick for Headliner of the Week is high school seniors, because this week in particular is sort of the deadline of when they need to decide on what college they're going to accept an offer from, and which ones they're not going to. And so my daughter, my oldest, is graduating this year, and so she thought long and hard about where she wanted to go, but she had to click the decline button and then the accept button on some schools. So it's a big deal for high school seniors, as you know, to be able to make that's like the first big decision that they've had to make is what am I going to do for the next several years of my life? And that's a big deal.
Do you want to say anything about her plans? Or
Yeah, so she had, I guess it came down to Penn State, and she applied to the United States Military Academy at West Point. So she got into Penn State, and she applied to other schools too, but the ones she narrowed it down to were Penn State and West Point. And she got into Penn State and was excited about that. But she didn't get an appointment directly into West Point, but she did get an appointment to the prep school, which is on post there. And actually, my husband was a deputy commandant there for several years, and she lived up there. So she picked the prep school, West Point Prep School. So she's going to go there in July, and I'm, of course, very nervous about everything because mothers are, but she's very excited, and I know she'll do great.
Well, congratulations to her and to you all. I also have a high school senior, and my son has decided that he is going to NC State. So all of our NC State fan listeners, I'll just put that out there now and try to be nonpartisan in my talk. Probably not. He also got into Virginia Tech for engineering, which is where I went. Go Hokies, and my husband went. But I really appreciate the in-state tuition of NC State, and that's the place that we're going to be hardcore Wolfpack family. He also looked at UNC Wilmington, so I'll give them a shout out too.
Oh, that's great.
It's a beautiful campus at Wilmington too, and State is nice too.
Yeah, that's right. That's great. That's right.
All right, my headliner. It's funny, but we were talking it through before we started recording, and it's similar to Representative Paré. Mine is this May-cember, like the busy holiday time of December, but in May for everyone associated with schools, for the teachers, the students, and the parents, and just this big rush of busy time, of end of year everything as we head into summer, since it's now May as you all are listening to this. So, all right, well, we are out of time. Appreciate Representative Paré for being on for the News and Observer. I'm Dawn Vaughn with producer Kevin Keister. Thanks for listening, and we'll talk to you next time.
For more from our politics team, subscribe to the News and Observer at newsobserver.com/subscribe. Follow us on Twitter at Under the Dome and NC Insider, and sign up for our weekly political newsletter, also called Under the Dome, at newsobserver.com/newsletters. Thanks for listening.